Hey everybody, this is Gabe Hernandez from Comical Opinions. Wanted to take a little bit of a detour today. Instead of talking about just what's going on in the comic book news, wanted to talk a little bit about where I think DC can maybe make some headway against Marvel when they always seem to be playing catch up, especially when it comes to their properties on film and maybe not so much television, but mostly on film. Uh, as we move into the next phase of Marvel films and properties with the MCU and also with the Disney Plus channels, there's going to be potentially a significant presence of vampires in those properties. Dracula, in particular, is going to be one of those characters that they're looking at for a number of different properties. What you have up here in the screen in front of you is Tomb of Dracula, done by the late, great Gene Colan. Hopefully I'm saying that name right. I apologize if I am. He was most famously known for doing Tomb of Dracula, among other things, but this is the one that, at least for me anyway, always has a place in my heart. One thing that was particularly interesting about his style is he used a lot of deep shadow and a lot of heavy lines for dramatic effect. And I think there are some video interviews with him out there where he makes a point of saying that he liked to make it deep, make it dark, make it menacing, not pretty Dracula, not a necessarily historical accurate Dracula, but just someone who just emanated force, strength, and power. And his particular version of Dracula, he actually modeled after a late great actor by the name of Jack Palance, who himself also did a film as Dracula. And you can see the kind of the physical similarities here between Jack and the version that Gene did when he was doing Tomb of Dracula for a number of years. And you can get the anthologies and the collections and everything else. Tomb of Dracula is no longer in print. Marvel no longer does that book, but as I said, they're coming back with potentially putting Dracula in a number of the Marvel properties. One example would be Doctor Strange 2, and there's already been some speculation that vampires will sort of reemerge or emerge, but maybe reemerge as in they've been hidden for a while into the Marvel universe by borrowing for some of the properties that have been out there. Ooh, sorry about that. For example, there's a 5-issue run where Doctor Strange actually faced Dracula called the Mentesi Formula. This was in the mid-2000s. The story put Strange against Dracula, so that's one option when we're looking at Doctor Strange 2 in the Multiverse of Madness. Blade is another property that's coming up. Now, Blade is a daywalker, which means he's sort of half and half, but they're looking at potentially using Dracula and the idea of a Dracula's death, which is a one-shot that was done back in 2010, as part of the origin story of the movie. Not necessarily Blade's origin, but just using Dracula as part of that story to kind of give some gravitas and weight to vampires in the Marvel universe as something that's just been hidden. They've always been there. The heroes didn't know about it because they've just been hiding in the shadows. And then another theory, this is comic book news. I apologize. They tend to be very clickbaity and very unsubstantiated with the rumors. But yeah, there is a rumor out there that the forthcoming Moon Knight Disney Plus series is going to have Dracula in there as one of the supernatural beings that's going to face off against the disciple of Khonshu. All great stuff. All will be potentially very popular. Everybody loves Dracula. Dracula has been around forever since Bram Stoker's original writing. He's been a mainstay in horror for as long as a medium's been sort of in the popular culture for as long as the original Bram Stoker book has been around. However, DC really doesn't do an equivalent Dracula. They don't have Dracula necessarily as a mainstay character within their properties, but they do have a character that they could leverage that I think, if they do it right, would be just as popular, if not more so, because there's a bit more meat to his story, and that character is Andrew Bennett under the title of I, Vampire. Now, I, Vampire was a sort of a mini-series vampire story that was on the back half of the House of Mystery anthology books that DC was putting out since the 50s. But I, Vampire only ran from about 1981 to 1983. They did bring the character of Andrew Bennett back in the New 52. It wasn't the same. He was sort of more Twilight shirtless, sexy, look at my abs type of vampire. It just didn't have the same impact and same weight. And if you've never heard of Andrew Bennett or just have very little familiarization with the character, basically he was a 16th century knight, a nobleman who was bitten by a stray vampire, if you want to call it that way. But he was able to kind of resist the urges and still maintain himself as a decent human being. His girlfriend or fiance or wife at the time, her name was Mary. She said, "Let me share this with you so we can be together, so you won't feel alone and lonely and grow old and while I die." And he bit her and it corrupted her, and she became known as the Queen of Blood. I think it was Mary, Queen of Blood, and that set up sort of the backstory. The sort of interesting characteristic about Andrew is he always has this sort of little colonial ponytail, or maybe not colonial, just old English ponytail with a little white streak down the middle of his hair. That's sort of his tell sign for his design of his character. Why this is more interesting, I think, than just using Dracula, which sort of is known around the world, is Andrew is not he's a vampire, but he has a bit of moral control over himself. In other words, he didn't quite give in to the darkness. He fights it on a constant basis. So in that sense, he's sort of an anti-hero. His relationship with Mary, who was his sort of fiance, girlfriend, wife at the time, that eventually turned her into a corrupt and full-on evil vampire, sets up a hero-villain conflict right from the beginning of his story, and that carries it all the way through, because she sort of develops a cult of followers, sort of evil henchmen. She's always looking to take over the world, so to speak, and be the Queen of Blood over all of humanity as cattle, if you want to look at it that way. And yet, so Andrew has basically a constant quest. He's always on the search for Mary. And he carries that guilt with him because he was the one that sired her. He did it out of love. He did it out of loneliness. And now he's paying the price for basically giving in to his selfish desire. And that selfishness now visits a curse upon the world in the form of Mary. So now you have an instant hero, sort of anti-hero against a malevolent villain. They carry that through, not only through just a short period of time, they can carry that through centuries of time. And there's a constant back and forth and chase. Because they're immortal, they can do that. And I think where that would come into play for DC is you can set this up in various time periods that allows you to interact potentially with historical figures if you go all the way back to the 16th century. And then you could do this as a series of movies. You can do this as something on the CW, although with the CW, you probably have to sanitize it a bit because we are talking about vampires, and hopefully it won't become too much like Vampire Diaries or Twilight-ish if they really go full on gothic. If anything, the tone and the quality of the storytelling from the original series was much closer to an old television series called Dark Shadows. It's not quite the same, but it was more along that gothic line of properties. And so Andrew Bennett has kind of established himself as a character with almost instantly with a villain that he has to chase throughout time. And he has also appeared alongside other characters, I think most notably John Constantine, and in that Justice League Dark Circle, especially when he was brought back for the New 52, which I don't think was particularly popular, but he did come back for a period of time. And I think what's interesting is also not only does he have this conflict with Mary, who's the vampire that he created out of his own selfishness, but he also encounters people along the way. And when he does, his noble sort of the inner goodness of himself puts him in sort of interesting situations where he's coming across people who are lost, people who are damaged, coming across basically the human villains of the world. And as you can see here from the screen, I'm sort of scrolling through some of his history, he's encountered other DC characters as well, including Batman. And that sort of makes for a little bit of a humorous contrast when you have Batman coming across an actual vampire. And then in scientists as well, when you bring that a little bit further into the future. So there's all kinds of story opportunities there, as opposed to Dracula, who you sort of look at Dracula and it's like, well, okay, he's supposed to be the king of the vampires and he's been around for centuries, and yet he still hasn't figured out how to dominate the world. I think you could argue that maybe one of the main ways he's been kept in check is maybe by the bloodline of the Van Helsings. I guess you could go with that. That might be one way to go, and I think that's been brought up multiple times before. But even that, to a certain extent, kind of gets a little far-fetched when you figure he's so powerful and so deadly and so dangerous. Eventually, he just waits them out. That's always that option. But here, the hero is the vampire, more of like an anti-hero, and I think that has a lot more story potential. When it comes across other vampires, that may not be good. I know Marvel is bringing back a Werewolf by Night series. Then again, you could do the same thing on the DC side, where Andrew is coming across other creatures of the night, ghosts, werewolves, witches, demons, all kinds of things. I'm sure Andrew Bennett would come across Etrigan at one point. That would be an interesting story. All kinds of DC characters can be brought to bear. I'm sure he'll have some the potential for interaction with the Justice League. And the stories are already there. They're already tailor-made for small screen, big screen. Certainly bring it back to print. I think the new 52 version of Andrew Bennett with iVampire was about as successful as the No 52 in general, which was not good. But I think you can bring this back, and if they go back to sort of the original tone of the series, which was darker, more dramatic, just more Saturday afternoon, not quite in a cheesy way, but just something in a more cinematic way, I think that's going to get a lot more traction from establishing that character as somebody that gets a lot of attention. And the good news is a lot of that storytelling is already there. Now, should it go on the CW? Maybe. I have my misgivings just because I'm afraid they'll sanitize it and make it kind of too Vampire Diary-ish, too Twilight-ish. But if they can be more consistent to the source material like they did recently with Stargirl, CW Stargirl, I thought was an excellent show. I thought they did a great job translating that character. Don't mean to get too off track, but if they can take the same level of respect and faithfulness that they did for CW Stargirl and then apply it to iVampire with Andrew Bennett, they can bring that to the air pretty quickly. Because it's not big superpowers. It's basically standard vampire stuff. And I think they can do it. But it takes some willingness. And I think if they get on top of it, they can sort of beat Marvel to the punch when it comes to bringing Marvel more to the main pop culture as far as comic book translations go. Anyway, that's what I think. That's my opinion. Let me know what you think. I'm always down for more vampires. I love horror. I just love horror. But let me know what you think. Are you a horror fan? Would you like to see more vampires? Are you familiar with Andrew Bennett? Are you familiar with iVampire? Do you think that might be a better choice, like I'm saying here, than using Dracula? Can DC beat Marvel to the punch? These are all my ideas, but I want to hear your opinions. So please share, subscribe, link, give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down. If you disagree with me, give me that thumbs down and let me know in the comments section. Let me have it. And let's see if you've got some better ideas and let's just discuss it and talk about it. I'd like to get some threads going on that. But before I go, don't forget to sign up for the Comical Opinions newsletter. The link is down in the description. It's completely free, and people who subscribe, I'm building up a set of perks and bonuses that are for subscribers only, so you don't want to miss out on that. And the latest article is up talking about the importance of comics editors when you're putting together a creative team. So that's my opinion. That's what I've got for today. This is Gabe Hernandez for Comical Opinions. I thank you for your time, and you have a great day.